Hey, what's going on guys? Meekon here, back again with another video. And in today's video, I'm going to give 3 more tips to help improve your line art. If you haven't already, I suggest you watch my first video about line art where I give 3 tips centered around the mindset I find helpful when drawing line art. However, in this video, we are going to be going over tips you can physically do with your line art, unlike the mindset ones we went over in my earlier video. So let's just jump right into it with our first tip, the usage of T-lines. So what are T-lines? Well, they could look like this, or like this, or like this. These sort of branch-like shapes are called T-lines. You may be asking, how can something so simple looking help improve my line art? Well, these simple T-lines create a sense of depth, space, and organicness. It looks natural. This is because of how it simply conveys the overlapping of objects. When we are describing an object's form in 3D space, it's sometimes difficult to fully express these qualities of 3D-ness when we are working on a 2D surface. Our greatest asset to make line drawings not look flat is through overlapping. And the easiest and fastest representation of overlapping is, you guessed it, T-lines. With the use of T-lines, we can clearly see the overlap of different forms, whether they be organic or inorganic. And by the way, T-lines aren't always representative of a T shape. It's just the simplest and quickest way to give an overlapping quality to your drawings. T-lines could look like this or this. Whenever you have a form or mass overlapping another, try to indicate that overlap using T-lines or any sort of variation of them. The next tip we have is expressing light through your line art. Usually when we're doing line art, we're really only working with 2 tones, black and white. And this makes representing value very difficult because line art is a binary. It's either the brightest bright or the darkest dark. There is no in between. But what we can do is give off the illusion of more dynamic lighting through things like hatching and ambient occlusion. Let's first go over hatching. Hatching is drawing parallel lines in succession to create the illusion of value with one tone. There are multiple ways to hatch, such as cross-hatching, where you draw over an existing hatching with another that is at a different angle. Depending on the angle difference between the 2 hatches, it could create different effects. I personally love hatching that's around 10 to 15 degrees or even less, rather than the straight 90, since that right angle makes it super industrial and mechanical, though I think that style of hatching works well with shading things like buildings, interiors, or any sort of thing that has strong structural integrity. Another cool thing about hatching is that you don't have to draw straight lines. You can hatch with curved lines. This gives more form to a subject when you hatch along the contours, kind of like a wireframe. But beware, if your hatchings don't match the contours of your subject, it might look a little wonky. Hatching in general is pretty difficult. You need to keep the space between your lines consistent and their line thickness as well. Any sort of unintentional deviation will stick out like a sore thumb. Now let's go over ambient occlusion. If you're familiar with 3D software, you'll probably know what ambient occlusion is. All it is the occlusion of ambient light. Okay, that was a terrible example for me. Just think of it as when 2 things are super close together, light has a harder time getting into those tiny crevices, and what's left is a relatively dark shadow. We can apply this to our line art by just hinting at this effect of ambient occlusion. If you see any sort of crevices where objects meet, add that shadow and it instantly gives more life to it. Instead of it being boring and flat, it's now a lot more dynamic looking. From what we also learned in the first tip, you can apply that ambient occlusion shadow right where the lines intersect in a T-line to give even more depth to them. If we think of lines as information of a light source instead of solely defining a subject's contours, we can get a lot more expressive with how we use lines. Not only that, but we can also block in major shadow shapes. Like in this page. What you'll notice from looking at these black and white comics is that they don't just use black as a tool to define contours and shapes, but also make use of white. When something is in shadow, white describes the information, and when something is in light, black describes the information, creating this sort of checkerboard pattern of black to white to black to white. creating a lot of variety with only 2 tones. We are essentially painting with black and white. And for our final tip for today, we have silhouettes. But Mikan, you might be asking, why are we bothering with silhouettes when we're doing line drawings? Isn't that something more in the realm of painting and shape design? Well, silhouettes and contours are actually really important when we're dealing with 2D drawings in general, especially when we're restricted with lines and working with black and white. The purpose for a strong silhouette is to create a strong read. Having a clear initial read is going to make any drawing a lot easier to look at because it helps contain a viewer's attention, separating a subject from the background. You see strong silhouettes in black and white comics and more famously in manga, but you don't have to rearrange elements, change a pose, or scrap your entire character design because it has a weak silhouette. Although you could, and it'd probably be better if you did, there's a pretty simple and effective cheat you can do to enhance your silhouettes. It won't be as effective as redrawing the whole thing, but it is a cheap and quick way to get a somewhat similar result. And that is by thickening the line art around the subject ever so slightly so that it is still cohesive with the rest of the lines while having enough contrast to contain the viewer's attention. And what you will realize is that when you have a strong silhouette that reads well, the details within that silhouette can be minimal to downright interpretive, because details fall into place when the main foundation is sound. It's all about the initial read. Our brains are hardwired to assume information. We as artists just need to give that subtle hint to suggest it. And those were 3 more tips to help improve your line art. It's not the end of the video yet, and you already know that it's time for a bonus tip. Actually, I don't know if I can even call this a tip. It's more of an anti-tip because line weight by itself doesn't produce good line art. In fact, if you don't know how to properly use line weight, it could end up making your lines look wonky, unpolished, or even incohesive in a piece. But never fear, you've reached the end of this video, and now I can confidently say that you are ready to use line weight. Why is this? It is because line weight should be used as a tool to help with the tips we've gone over today. Line weight makes more organic looking T-lines because of the taper nature of a line with pressure sensitivity on. It makes expressing light easier to do with one stroke instead of having to go back and erase lines away. And line weight variations are a breeze when you know where to make thicker and thinner lines regarding our 3rd tip. So you have all the information needed to make great line art with or without line weight. If you notice throughout the speed paint for this video, I actually didn't use any line weight, just a hard round brush with no opacity or size pressure on it. And I encourage you to do the same. Practice with brushes with no opacity or size jitter, with opacity and no size jitter, and all other combinations of those types of brushes. It'll help you to understand how to make the most out of your line art without needing to rely on pressure sensitivity. And what you'll find when you eventually return to using those brushes is that line art will be a lot easier than before. Of course, there are still other nuances with line weight that I haven't gone over in this video. Things like stylization, forcing perspective, expressing motion, enhancing composition, and a whole bunch of other things that I myself have yet to learn how to do with line art. So how about you subscribe so that when I do eventually figure these things out, you won't miss when I make another video about line art or any educational art video I make. So yeah, if you liked it, hit that like button and desaturate that subscribe button. Share, like, comment, whatever. Until next time, bye-bye. 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 Beep, 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 beep.